If you want to be an online entrepreneur and build a successful business, you need to be doing this content creation on a regular basis. And I'll tell you, I don't think monthly is going to cut it, because if people only have a reason to see you once a month, and if you only really have a reason to talk to them once a month, people are going to forget you.
Welcome to the Online Genius Podcast, where host and renegade-thinking beer-brewing lawyer turned online entrepreneur Bobby Klink proves that building and protecting your online genius doesn't have to be rocket science. Bobby and his expert guests break down online marketing and the legal stuff so you can stop sweating the small stuff and get back to building your amazing business. Now, here's your host, Bobby Klink.
Hey there. Welcome to episode 52 of the Online Genius Podcast. I'm your host, Bobby Klink, and I am excited for today's show because we're kicking off a new theme. Now, for the next series of episodes, we're going to be talking about the original content you are putting out or need to be putting out into the world. In other words, we're talking about your content strategy. This week, we're going to be having an overview where we're going to talk about the big issues in creating a content strategy. And in future weeks, we're going to dive into some specific topics a bit more in depth, like various ways that you can create content, different forms of content that you can be putting out, etc. But this week is all about the big picture. But before we dive in, as always, this week's episode is brought to you by the Online Genius podcast community on Facebook. I love coming here to you every week and talking about online marketing and the legal stuff and all these, issues that we're talking about. But I wanted to create a place where we could go deeper, where you could ask me questions, and that is the podcast community. That's where we'll have additional trainings, resources, and Q&A sessions. Now that I'm through a launch we just got done with, I'm going to be being in there on a more regular basis. And it's going to give you a chance to really get answers to questions you might have, especially about the legal stuff, but also about the marketing stuff. Or if you have questions about why I'm doing what I do, happy to answer those. I enjoy talking about this stuff, and the place to do that is in the Online Genius podcast community on Facebook. You can join by going to youronlinegenius.com/community. Now, when you do that, you're taken to Facebook and you can ask to join. Just make sure to answer the questions. I like to say that I really don't care what the answers are that you give, as long as maybe you don't curse out me or my family. I just want to make sure that you give an answer. That's kind of the way that I can make sure that it's not a bot or it's not someone who's just coming there to try and promote and kind of ruin the group. So again, go to youronlinegenius.com/community and you can join the group and be part of the conversation. Now, I was first drawn to the concept of online entrepreneurship and online marketing by the idea of inbound content marketing. The idea is kind of simple, and I loved it as someone who thought, hey, I don't like being a sales guy. The idea is, hey, you create great content, and that draws people in, and then they come to you rather than you having to push out your message and try to sell to them. In other words, hey, they're going to come to you and say, hey, I want to buy. And you're not going to have to do the sales part. That sounded like something that was fantastic to me. And when I had my law firm and the normal ways of marketing weren't really working for me great because I didn't enjoy going and networking and doing the schmoozing stuff that other lawyers did, I said, hey, this is something I can do to build my law practice. And so I dove in and I actually took a series of courses through HubSpot. I don't even know if they have it anymore. HubSpot is an inbound marketing company. They had a HubSpot University and I took a series of classes and I'm pretty sure at the end of it, they said I was certified as an inbound marketer. Now, I jokingly say that was not a good use of my time, that's not the kind of thing I should be doing, but I actually think it was a pretty darn valuable thing for me to do. Because content marketing is the backbone of building an online business. It's just that simple. And so I believe that it's valuable for me to have that background, and it's valuable for every entrepreneur to be fluent in the idea of content marketing and creating a content strategy. So today, we're going to be talking about the key components, including kind of the mindset issues, and the way you need to be thinking about creating an effective content strategy. Now, today is not going to be in the weeds about podcasting or creating YouTube videos or creating a blog or SEO or any of that stuff. We'll talk about those issues in upcoming episodes. Today, we're talking about the overall plan and strategizing, which again, if you listen to me very long, you're going to know I like talking about strategy because I believe that strategy is a really important part of what we do, and we should have a plan in place before we act. So with that, let's go ahead and dive in. Now, the first element here and the first piece of guidance is that your content strategy needs to fit into your overall business plan. Now, this shouldn't be a revolutionary idea, but a lot of entrepreneurs miss it, including myself. And you can miss it in various ways. Maybe you're just kind of throwing stuff out and see what sticks. And maybe you're not concentrating on the right topics. But really what you need to be doing is thinking about what you sell, who you sell it to, and how you sell it. Remember, we talked about those back in episode 47, where we talked about kind of understanding your business model and making sure that you have a clear view of what that model is. And understanding your business model should drive your content strategy in so many different ways. First, when you think about it, the what is it that you sell is going to impact or should impact the content you're putting out in the world. And this is in a couple of different ways. First, your free content, your content that you're doing on a regular basis needs to align with your paid content. Now, it's pretty obvious when it comes to subject matter. So, for example, you're not going to hear me talking about weight loss because I sell legal templates to online entrepreneurs. So for me to go out and write blog posts about weight loss or about things like that wouldn't make sense. You're going to hear me talking about things that are generally related to what it is that I sell. And you should be doing the same thing. Now, I do want to put a little caveat here. That doesn't mean that you have to only talk about exactly what it is you sell. There's a concept known as Trojan horse marketing, which is the idea that you bring people in with certain content that's maybe more interesting but related to what you sell or provide, but there's a link. And it makes sense to talk about those things, to have content about those things, because that'll draw people in, they'll get into your world, and ultimately maybe they'll buy from you. So again, that was the original idea behind this podcast. It's quite honestly still a lot of what's happening. In this week's episode, for example, you're not going to hear a legal lesson. You're not going to hear anything about the legal issues of content. But the idea is that someone who would enjoy hearing about creating a content strategy is someone who could be my customer, who could enjoy my content, who could come into my world, and then could be interested in the legal stuff that I currently offer. So you can do the Trojan horse method, but you still need to be aligned. And the more aligned it is, the better. And you'll remember when we talked about list building, we talked about the same thing. So this is kind of an idea that you want to be thinking about throughout your business. You need alignment from your free content that's just, they get it no matter what, your content strategy piece. Then your lead magnet needs to be aligned with that content. And then all of that needs to be aligned with what you sell. So that's talking about the content. But there's actually a more subtle point here that you need to think about, and that when you're really thinking about a good content strategy, you'll put into play. And that is that you need to be talking up or stressing the value of the particular solution that you offer. And what I mean by that I don't mean that you're selling your particular solution. What I mean is, if you sell templates, your content should be stressing the value of whatever those templates are. If it's email templates, you're going to talk about the value of email. You're going to be kind of talking about those things. If you sell courses, your content should stress the value of learning and getting that kind of content, and how courses are a great way to actually learn and to get these things done. Let me give you a concrete example in my business, okay? At this point, as I'm recording this, what I sell is exclusively templates. I sell individual a la carte legal templates, and then I have my template library, which I launch a few times a year, where you get all of my templates, everyone now and everything in the future. So all of my business, though, all of my sales are templates. And so it's all about legal policies and agreements. So if you think about it, there's a couple of things there. The first point, not this subtle point, but the first point is I'm going to talk about issues like client agreements, course agreements, things like that, because people need to understand that concept. The more subtle point is you'll hear me, and I do this anyway because I believe it, but you'll hear me talk about the importance of written agreements and the importance of getting it in writing. In a sense, what I'm doing with that content is I am planting the seed that you need written agreements and policies. And then, of course, that will help you to think through, okay, well, I need those. Where do I get them? It's a natural progression of everything. So there's alignment in the content, in the subject matter, but also in talking about the value of whatever it is that you sell. So that's an important part of this as you're thinking through your content strategy. And the subtle part is more nuanced. It doesn't have to be there every time. You don't have to talk about it in every piece of content you create, but it's just an overarching theme. Think of it as kind of one of the themes of your business and your messaging. Now, so that's the what, but the who is also going to affect where you focus your content strategy efforts. In other words, who you market to affects the kind of content you're going to create. And what do I mean by that? Well, are your customers or potential customers the kinds of people who listen to podcasts? Are they the kinds of people who will watch YouTube videos? Are they the kinds of people who would prefer to read a blog post? All of that needs to fit into your strategy. And you need to think through. For example, if you're in a niche where people just don't listen to podcasts yet, or the podcasts they listen to are, maybe your customers listen to fiction, but nothing related to your business, well, then a podcast is not going to be the right format for your content. The same thing with YouTube. If you're marketing to people who largely are not going to be, watching videos online, then YouTube's not going to be for you. So you have to think through those pieces. Now, in my space where I am, talking to online entrepreneurs, I have the luxury that online entrepreneurs are pretty active in all these places. Podcasts are well known. YouTube is accepted. Blogs are accepted. So all of the different mediums are pretty well accepted, methods of communicating with people. So I don't have to worry about that. But if your customer isn't someone who is in a particular place, you have to think about that. But it's also going to come into play in your social media plan, which is an outgrowth of your overall content strategy. One of the things I'll talk about a little bit later is how you're going to use your content as kind of the anchor for everything else you do, and that includes your social media. And so that means you have to think through, where are your customers? And, a lot of people would say forever you need to be everywhere. The fact is that very few people are doing that, and most people aren't doing it effectively. And what I mean by that is, are your potential customers on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or Pinterest or Reddit or somewhere else? Figure that out. The chances are that most of your customers are going to be in one or two places. For example, in the online entrepreneurship space, Twitter is less important for the course creators, the coaches, etc., than it is if you're in the space where you're talking to the tech people. Tech people are much more likely to be on Twitter. it just kind of is the demographics. You got to figure that out. And, if you're listening to this later in time, it may be that that's completely changed. But you need to understand where your people are and think that through that piece when you are creating your content and thinking through what to do with your content once it's created. So this is all part of thinking through how is my overall content strategy going to fit in with my overall business plan of what I offer and who I offer it to. So you think through those pieces and you start to kind of get a base of, okay, I am going to be creating content on these topics and it's going to be in this media, etc. And I'm going to use this social media platform. Those are kind of the first steps you need to have in creating your content strategy. But now we're going to go to the second piece, which is let's just talk about your content strategy. And what I like to say is you need to have a comprehensive strategy with an overall plan. So this means you don't just throw out a bunch of random content here, even if it's related generally to your topic. You need to be intentional about the content you put out there. And I have to admit, for a long time, I was not. I'll be honest with you, when I first did this, even though I had, taken all this and I understood all these concepts, I didn't want to put in the time. This was back when I was using it mainly for my law firm. And so I would just kind of randomly put stuff out there. And then I would, at some point for my law firm, I'll admit to you, I actually just hired a firm to just start writing blog posts for me. And I didn't really take much control over it. That was silly of me because that's never going to work. A couple of reasons: you're not going to have your voice in the blog post, but separately, I wasn't even, the one who was kind of in charge of saying, okay, here are the topics we're going to talk about in this order, etc. So you have to be more intentional about it. And again, you need to make sure that it all relates back to the central themes that you want to be talking about in your business. And it should all tie together in a comprehensive way. Now, there are different ways to do that, and you can come up with your own way. You'll kind of see how I'm doing that in this podcast now with themes where I kind of walk through various topics that are related and talk about a lot of different things. So I've created an overall strategy and a plan that's intentional and relates to topics that I care about. But there's another point that you ought to be thinking about here. The best way to think of your content is as a hub and spoke system. And it's a hub and spoke in a couple of different ways. First, think about your content in terms of various topic hubs. So you're going to have various buckets of topics you're going to cover in your business and in your content. Now, this can vary or will vary from person to person, but you'll see, for example, that in my business, you could clearly see how, there's various topics that I'm focusing on now. So some of them are things like business startup. That's obviously an important piece for entrepreneurs. And it's something that fits in with what I do and with what I sell. So that makes sense. That's an obvious place. But there are other topics, hubs as well. For example, making money online. That would relate to things like, selling courses, selling templates, selling a mastermind, selling a membership, affiliate marketing, all of these different concepts, those fit within the making money online. How are you going to actually make the money topic? So that's an important piece as well. Then you could think about things like building your team. That's something where I have products and I can talk to people about that. Again, last week's episode, we talked about it, and there are other pieces to it as well. So that gives you a sense of when I say buckets, the kind of thing we're talking about. I'm talking about overarching themes. Then what you'll do is once you come up with whatever your buckets are, figure it out. Maybe for you it's 3 or 5 or 7, whatever the number is, figure that out. And then as a general matter, any piece of content that you are going to create must fit into one of those buckets. If it doesn't, you should not put it out there. Now, as you get further along, maybe you'll say, okay, I will occasionally have some content that's not directly in one of these buckets, but it's related. But what I would suggest is early on, especially, I would not have a miscellaneous or other bucket. Because the problem is that allows you way too much leeway. It's kind of like the concept, if you have followed someone like Dave Ramsey and his budgeting concepts, he doesn't want you to have a miscellaneous. Every dollar has a particular name, is going to a particular thing. And the problem is if you have a miscellaneous, you're not really doing the work. The same thing with your content buckets and making sure that your topics fit within it. You should have specific content buckets, and then every piece of content you're going to create should fit into one of those buckets. It should be a spoke that kind of comes into that central bucket and everything is related. So that's one part of the hub and spoke model. The other part of the hub and spoke model is the location, and thinking of where is your central hub? What's your central location online? And ideally, what you're going to want to do is have everything kind of coming back to whatever your central location is. Maybe it's your website. Maybe it's your Facebook group. Maybe it's, a podcast page. Maybe it's, I don't even know. Maybe it's your YouTube channel. Whatever it is, though, you're going to want to figure out, okay, this is the central location where I want people to be. And whatever that is, all of your content, you're going to want to direct back to that. So that's kind of one cool part. You can start doing that and getting everybody coming into that location. But then as you get more advanced, you can also do things like kind of interlinking and putting things together. So for example, let's say that my Facebook group is my central hub. Well, I've got that, but in my Facebook group, I've also got some content that goes out to a free membership group where I'm going to collect email addresses. And then that maybe brings me back to this other place where it's going to direct people to my website. And you get this kind of virtuous circle where everything is connected, and every piece of your system in content, in marketing, in lead magnets, everything is kind of a closed circle where once someone gets into your world, you are directing them around to the right part of your online world for them at that particular moment. That is something that we should all work to eventually. And again, I'm not saying you don't send people other places. Obviously you do. For example, if someone came to me and wanted to know how to build an online course, I'm not going to try to tell you. I'm going to point you to various people that I know and trust who have that information. And then I'll say, and when you have questions about the legal stuff, come back to me. But that's the idea. You want to generally have kind of a universe where people don't need to leave, and kind of each piece takes them to the next step. And that can be very helpful. And when you create those connections and you refer back to the various pieces in your content, that's great. You'll notice that I often in this podcast refer back to other episodes. Well, I do that for a reason, because I would, of course, love for you to go back and listen to those episodes if you haven't. If I'm talking about this topic and I say, oh, and in episode number 557, or, it wouldn't be 557, but in episode 47, I talked about this, that, and the other, then if you're interested in this, that, and the other, you're going to go back and listen to episode 47. So you start to see the virtuous circle here. So that's what you want to do in creating your content. So that's kind of the two high-level things. Now I'm going to go to the third point, and now it's time for some tough love. You need to be creating regular, weekly content. I'm going to say that again. You need to be creating regular, weekly content. And by weekly content, I don't mean social media posts. Social media is important, but I'm talking about as part of your content strategy, you need to create at least one piece of new content every week. Now, the reason for this is simple. If you want to keep people interested, you have to have new content for them to consume. If you don't have new content for them to consume, they are not going to stay interested. They're going to come in, see what you got. Okay, I'm done. Goodbye. Now, they're going to move on. And part of that is, that once they've consumed everything, what are you going to tell them? Maybe you're going to try to send them a weekly email, but what are you going to talk to them about in a weekly email if you don't have new content or something valuable to give them in that new email? And if you can't send them email, and if there's not a reason for them to be interacting with you on a weekly basis, what happens? You won't be top of mind with them anymore. They won't be thinking about you. It's just a fact. We think about the people that we are seeing, interacting with, etc., on a regular basis. And even if people aren't opening your emails, if they see your emails every week, they'll remember you. And so again, having that regular weekly content gives you that reason. Now, I know a lot of entrepreneurs balk at this. They say, I can't possibly create weekly content. I just can't do it. I don't have enough time. I can't do it. It's not possible. Well, what I'm going to tell you is, in my view, this is something that isn't negotiable. If you want to be an online entrepreneur and build a successful business, you need to be doing this content creation on a regular basis. And I'll tell you, I don't think monthly is going to cut it, because if people only have a reason to see you once a month, and if you only really have a reason to talk to them once a month, people are going to forget you. Even every other week, in my view, isn't going to be good enough. You need every single week. They're going to get an email from you with new content for something to consume. And it may be that they don't consume it this week because they're busy or whatever, but they know it's coming, and that will get you that content. In my view, this needs to be part of your A1 sauce. Again, this is another Dave Ramsey reference. The concept is, this is the most important thing on your list. If you're not creating weekly content, you need to carve out the time to do it. And again, what I'm going to tell you is, you can do this if you decide to. If you carve out one day every 6 weeks, my belief is you could batch 6 weeks worth of content. Now, it's going to be harder if you're doing a podcast and you have guests and you have to do those things, or if you're doing a YouTube show and you're going to do guests, it may get harder. But you could write 6 blog posts in a day if you sat down and said, I'm turning off all distractions, that's what I'm doing. Or if you take the time to create podcast outlines in advance and do all those things, you could do 6 episodes in a day, or maybe a day and a half. And then you're done. You have 6 weeks worth of content in a day or a day and a half. You need to be able to find that time, and you need to prioritize it and put this up there if you actually care about doing it. Because without it, let's talk about where this stuff fits in. This content becomes the anchor for your weekly email. It can become the anchor for your social media. It can become the anchor for your Facebook group or anything else like that. If you have a core piece of anchor content every week, it becomes very easy to execute all the other stuff we should be doing. My weekly emails almost write themselves now, because I come up with a story or a little tidbit related to the topic, and then I talk about the topic of the podcast. And so that's what you get when you sign up for my email list. On social media, again, I can talk about these concepts, and I can, first, link to the podcast episode, but then I can do things like say, okay, well, let me think of an inspirational quote related to that, or let me try to find, another deeper level that I can link to, or let me find some other content I can curate related to this topic. In my Facebook group, I can set this in the community. We can set this as the topic for the week. We can talk about what is it that we need to be doing. And again, this is especially good for my content, because we can talk about the legal stuff, the business stuff, etc., but we can do it in a very systematic way with a clear topic for the week. And so once you do this piece, everything else will fall in line. So again, I challenge you to find the time to do it. That is when things will actually start to work in your business. And again, what I'm going to tell you is, before I was creating weekly content on a regular basis and emailing my group or emailing my list about it, I didn't have much of a business. I just didn't, because it was haphazard. I was one of those people would get on my list and then they'd never hear from me. And so then when I'd email, they'd be like, who the heck is this guy? And so all of those, those problems went away once I created this podcast, and I have religiously done it, have not missed a week yet. I've had it every week since I launched. And so it's very easy for me to send an email to my list that says, hey, here's a new content I've got. Check it out. So it just makes it simple for me, and it will do the same thing for you. So you need to commit to create weekly content. And that brings us to kind of the logistics piece. And one of the objections I think people say is, I couldn't possibly come up with enough topics to talk about if I was doing weekly content. And I challenge you to actually try this exercise before you say that, because I always had that worry. I was like, there's not that much to talk about. But then I went through this process, and here's what it is. We're going to do a brain dump. You're going to start with those buckets of content we talked about back up in, earlier in the show, where we talked about, hey, you're going to create the buckets of different topics you're going to talk about as part of your content hub and spoke method. Okay. So write out whatever those are, whether it's 5 or 6, however many you have, create those. And then each one of those goes on a separate piece of paper. So if you have 6 topics, you put 6 pieces of paper, you pull them out and put those on the top. And then spend 5 to 10 minutes on each topic, dumping every potential idea for content related to that you could create. And again, don't censor yourself during the process. Don't worry about, did I already say that, etc. Just write until 5 or 10 minutes. Again, I would start with 5, but if you still have ideas when 5 minutes up, keep going. And just write until you've kind of expended all of your thought process. Do that for each one of these pages. What I'll tell you is I did this on a plane ride at one point, and in less than an hour, I think it was about 30 minutes, I came up with over 100 topics for content. 100 different things that I could talk about. And I could go back and look at that list now and I say, I missed some things and I've added things since. But the point is, with 100 topics of weekly content, I've got 2 years worth of content that I can create. And let's be honest, if 2 years from now I start repeating some of the stuff I've done now, you're not going to remember. I'm not going to remember. Most likely no one's going to remember. If you have 2 years worth of content, that is a ton of value for you to go ahead and create. So do that process. You will come up with plenty of things to write about. Once you've done that, then you're going to start calendaring it out, the topics, okay? And you can do it a couple different ways. Maybe you want to do like I am, do themes where you kind of go through things and maybe it's sequential, or maybe you do a series of related topics, or maybe you don't want to do themes. Maybe you want to intentionally say, I'm going to do, one topic from bucket 1, one from bucket 2, one from bucket 3, one from bucket 4, one from bucket 5, and then I'm going to start back again. So kind of alternating your buckets. Maybe that's how you want to do it. But just have a plan and think it through and try to create connections and make it sensible. And then you can start scheduling out. And I would challenge you to create a 6-month calendar of content when you first do it. And it's not going to be perfect. You're going to have to change it. You're going to have to pivot. You're going to have to tweak. But go ahead and create it now. And another thing to think about as you're creating that calendar and that schedule is your promotional schedule. So if you're going to be launching some of your own products at certain times, think through, hey, how could I have my content in the weeks leading up to those launches be congruent with what that launch is? So again, in my case, I'm going to be launching the template library again in January. And so I have intentionally worked into my content calendar where some of the things in the weeks leading up to the launch will be very specifically talking and relating to very specific topics that will make sense for people to be thinking about. And hey, if they like that, they're naturally going to be someone who might want to consider doing my training that I'm going to do as part of that launch, etc. So it just makes it easy to flow things through. Similarly, if you're going to be doing affiliate launches for people, think through that process. Obviously, it's ideal if you have content going out on a certain day and a certain week that kind of fits in with the schedule for promoting affiliate products. Doesn't have to, but it's very helpful if you can think that through. So think all of that as part of your calendaring and come up with a 6-month calendar of topics. Again, figure out what it is. Are you coming out on Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, Fridays? Whatever it is, figure it out and put it on a calendar. And then just start creating. And again, my suggestion to you is to batch as much as possible. I'm not perfect at it, I have to admit, but I'm working on trying to batch and trying to create a lot of content in short bursts so that I don't have to, for example, worry about creating content every week. No, it's done. I do a short burst of it, and then I can kind of put content creation aside for a while and work on other things. And that way you'll be in good shape. And then once the content is creating, that's when kind of the fun part comes. That's when you can start thinking about the repurposing. So you can say, okay, so I've got this blog post or this podcast episode or this YouTube topic coming out this week. Here's the topic. Okay, let's create some social media around that. And then you can think through, hey, can I repurpose this video or this podcast in another way? Maybe it's as a blog post. Again, you have to make those decisions about what makes sense for you, but you can think that through and maybe do it. And the idea behind that is that you create once and get multiple uses out of it. And the really good thing is if you have a good VA, they will be able to help you with that process. They'll be able to take the content, the one core piece you create, and then say, okay, I'm going to repurpose it. I'm going to create your social media graphics. I'm going to create, initial posts for you to look at and approve, and I'm going to do all that. So again, if you get it all done early, you can have that process kind of working as clockwork. Just it gets done every single week. So that's kind of the value here. Now, because I've mentioned multiple things about video and podcasts and blog posts, etc., I do want to talk about one issue here. When you're thinking about creating this content, you should not be alternating as a general matter. In other words, you should decide, are you a blogger? Are you a podcaster? Are you a YouTube video person? Or again, maybe there's something else, but think through those things and which one is going to be your core. Now, you can take whatever your core is and repurpose it somewhere else, but the point is that whatever your core kind of content is, that stays the same every week. For me, it's this podcast. I repurpose it in various ways. For example, pieces of it go and kind of automatically are made into these like little videos. They're not videos, but it's made into some video that can go onto YouTube that then is searchable and has some good value to bring people back to my page, etc. You might have a podcast or a video show and then, for example, have a VA take that and create a blog post out of it if you wanted to. That's something you could always do if you chose that as your repurposing strategy. But the point is you're going to create that podcast or that video every single week. And then the blog maybe is an ancillary thing. It's not like, this week I'm going to do a podcast, next week I'm going to do a video show, and then I'm going to do a blog post, and then maybe I'll just do another blog post. No, don't do it that way. Pick one and stick with it. And in the weeks to come, we'll be talking about some of those different pieces, for example, blogging and podcasting and YouTube or video creation. In fact, next week, we're going to be talking not about YouTube, but about video and one aspect of video. I interviewed one of the founders of Animoto who talks about using video as part of your overall brand strategy. So we're going to have that episode next week. But the idea is I'm going to talk about these pieces to help you make that decision if you don't know or if you're still struggling or maybe thinking you want to change. But the idea is that, you need to pick one and stick with it. So that's the creation piece. And that's really kind of it for this week. The things to think about is you need to build your content strategy that makes sense with your overall business plan. You got to create a comprehensive strategy where everything kind of fits together and links together and you're not just throwing spaghetti up against the wall to see what sticks. You have to commit to weekly content to make sure that you have an anchor for everything you do. And then you need to create the content and repurpose it in a kind of systematic way. And once you do that, kind of put all those pieces together, then you will have an overall content strategy and you'll be in good shape. So that's it for this week's episode of the Online Genius Podcast. If you're enjoying the show, again, make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss an episode. And bonus points to you if you'll take a couple of minutes to leave a review and to share an episode with others who you think could use it. And don't forget to join the Online Genius community by heading over to youronlinegenius.com/community. That's where we'll be talking more kind of about these topics and really getting into the weeds. And it's a place where you'll have a chance to talk to me directly. So I'll see you back here next week for episode 53 of the Online Genius Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Online Genius Podcast. Make sure to tune in next week for more great tips, tricks, and strategies to help you build and protect your online genius.